Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family.
Hi Jacques. It's Marcus here. Of
Hi,
course,
Marcus.
everybody out there knows this is Jacques Barcia. And I thought you were in Recife, but you said in an email to me that you were somewhere else in Brazil now, huh?
No, I'm in Recife, Brazil. Yeah.
You are there. Okay, cool. You must
Yeah.
have been traveling then when I sent you my first email.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Now, Jacques, a really interesting guy. I'm going to share screen because I want to give him a little chance to brag or something like that. So Jacques wrote a great piece for this book, Shine, an anthology of optimistic science fiction, way back in like 2008 or 9. Given the the time that it takes for a book to go from concept through to publication, and then I caught up with him, and I'm assuming that we're sharing a screen so we can see this. He contributed, he actually wrote in dialogue with me a short story on anticipatory imaginaries, which appeared in this special issue of a journal back in 2018. Okay. And, I really started thinking about you again, Jacques, when I came across and went and bought this particular book, Solar Punk, Ecological and Fantastical Stories, okay? And I immediately, when I got a copy, I immediately flicked through to see where's Jacques, and you weren't there. So, which was deeply disappointing, but, it got me thinking, and it made me think, I want to include you in a conversation now about global citizenship, Jacques, for for this undergraduate course, History 140. I really thank you for showing up. It's really dark and late for you in Brazil right now. So we should all be doubly thankful that you've agreed to give us a little bit of your creative wisdom as well as your critical wisdom, because one of the things I want to say about Jacques, just before we turn to you directly with the question, Jacques, is that you work for the Institute of the Future. As you said, you're a senior research fellow, is that correct?
Yeah, no, I'm a research fellow at the Institute for the Future. I do many things there, from teaching to research. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jacques, and I've caught up with you today because this course is about the history of global citizenship. So my very first question for you is, how would you see being a global citizen from your perspective? You're in Brazil. You've been doing this really interesting work with the Institute for the Future for a long time, but you're deeply aware of the historical past. Brazil has a very colourful, quite tragic history in many respects. So does Australia, for that matter. We're both colonised spaces in a sense, and we're still dealing with colonialism, even though you're, several centuries ahead of us. But I'm going to be quiet now and hand it over to you, Jacques. What are your thoughts on global citizenship?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marcus. I think I'm going to throw some ideas here, because as I was talking to you kind of before this recording, I kind of have a history in the kind of the radical left, the anarchist movements and things like that, which kind of fed into my optimism and my the creation of imaginaries, positive, optimistic imaginaries of the future. So I think that there are many ways in which we can create new paths into a better future. So kind of that mix up. So I'm saying that because back then, when I was really more involved in kind of the anarchist movement and things like that, I used to have, I think I still have that, kind of a very critical view of citizenship, because citizenship is not just about, you being part of a community that is delineated by some type of border. Citizenship is also the obligation that you have to the community.
Yeah.
Right. Citizenship is your right to be part of the community and everything that you take from the community, but also it's your obligation to the community in terms of, back then in a very, anarchist, but not very thoughtful, young anarchist view is like, oh, being a citizen is an obligation that I have to the country, to the border, to this
Yes.
abstract thing that really shouldn't exist because, they are abstractions. They are really these things called borders. They shouldn't exist.
Nation
They're
states
really
and all the rest of it. Yes. Yeah.
exactly. But then, if you think about it, if you go on a broader sense, in a more, again, optimistic view of citizenship, and you shift the word, country or border to community, then that's something very interesting. So, citizenship, and you can be a citizen of your neighborhood. You could be a citizen of condo. You can be a citizen of your identity, a group, an identitary group of people, like uh, transgender people are definitely a country in themselves in that sense, and
Yeah.
uh, they have benefits from being part of that community, but they also have obligations in terms of contributing to that community. Again, you can make a case and criticize that obligation. Am I obliged to do anything to that community? But then the idea of having some benefit, but having to contribute to something, I think it's very interesting take, or a new imaginary, if you want, for citizenship. Now,
What's interesting for me, Jacques, if you don't mind me jumping in there, but
yep,
you're locating citizen in the local.
yep,
So
yep.
that what is the local from a futures perspective, for instance, is a question that might lead you to sort of talk about the way we can think of a global so-called citizen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been observing many drivers of change, as we call them, like this, the big narratives that indicate the trajectory of change. We kind of call that drivers of change or mega trends. Um, we have been observing that there is an increase in hyperlocal connections and
Yeah.
hyperlocal activities. Cities are becoming more important than countries.
Yeah.
Communities are becoming more important than companies. So that there's a shift, and there's a very interesting work from the Institute for the Future from like 2 or 3 years ago, called Power Shifts, in which we kind of identified that there is a shift in power itself. Power is being distributed to smaller actors,
Yeah.
smaller in terms of number and scale. So it's power from big companies to citizens, in that sense, communities, individuals, for good and for ill.
Yeah.
But I think that as we get, as the world becomes larger again, what I found very interesting about futures thinking in general, like the observing futures, that how how drivers have counter drivers. So we have this whole, uh, uh, globalization that's been around for 30 or 40 years. As the last version of it, globalization, of course, has been around since the Romans and before. But this last turn is all about all the narratives in the world, all cultures in the world are one,
Yeah.
parenthesis, and they are American, and most of it. And then we have this counter reaction in which people are like, no, I have my own culture. I have this community. So we have indigenous people being more, outspoken and proud of their, and really being able to communicate their heritage, their culture.
Yep.
But not just that, like just simple people and people from, Recife, Brazil, or Brazil in general, publishing an anthology called Solar Punk, and that's the first time in the world that that term was was put in that way. And it's not about the center of power. The center of power is about this community of Brazilian science fiction authors creating new imaginaries. So there's a shift to the not just the poles of power, but a movement toward the periphery in general, but then the hyperlocal within the periphery, which I
So
find
you're
very
pointing,
interesting. I think,
yeah, you're pointing to a kind of decentralization process, yeah?
yep.
Yep. In which, of course, the individual so-called citizen, but definitely you and I and anybody who's listening to this discussion, we are all given a certain level of perhaps agency or autonomy, ability to act in ways that,
Yep.
were less plural, one would have to say, more centralizing of identity in the past. So you talked about transgender people. We are now able to at least getting a small amount of space to stretch what it means to be whoever we want to be.
Yeah. So there are two sides to that coin. In one hand, people who were, in the past were seen as I'm going to put it that way, were seen as just stupid because they believed in, the earth was flat, or, global warming wasn't true, or that, there were these huge conspiracies that, the government wanted to take their things, and they were just stupid and not, and ignorant. And now these people, because of hyperconnectivity, because of globalization, because of the internet, they found their nation as well. They are citizens. They are global citizens of a nation.
That's
of of fake news, of not believing, of post-truth, a nation of post-truth. They're citizens of post-truth world. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that the same thing happened to, many people in very interesting ways. So, for example, the way that many different communities within countries, but cross borders, they identify in certain causes and they help each other, even fighting against very well-established powers. For example, a couple of years ago, when fans of that Korean band BTS, I think it was BTS, they did that in which they kind of trolled the Trump rally. They bought all the tickets.
That was terrific, wasn't it? Made me laugh.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's a community of Korean pop doing some very effective, civil disobedience, in a sense, act against a very powerful man in the most powerful country in the world. So again, they are citizens of a cause, even if that's a cause that is that citizenship is it dissolves very quickly. So they kind of went into that battle. They went into that fight because, again, citizenship means that you are serving a certain nation or certain country, even in terms of war. If you go into war, you are commanded to go fight for your country. That's part of citizenship. That's the obligation part.
Yeah.
Now they choose to be part of it, and they feel compelled and even obliged by the community to kind of engage in that type of fight, that type of protest, engagement, civil disobedience act. So it's a very interesting thing that this global citizenship is more about connections, identities, like-mindedness. Sometimes, yes, bubbles, in the last about countries. Of course, there is something going on with extreme right, particularly, in which they the far right, which is something that is really crazy about the far right today, is that they are hyper nationalist. Actually, they are transnational hyper nationalists. So people
What a great
from,
term.
yeah, they, the hyper nationalists in the US, they have connections with the Brazilian hyper nationalists and the Turkish hyper nationalists, and they kind of all share the same, intent, and they share strategies, and they even share um, resources for
Yep.
the cause, and they're very different. And honestly, they would kill each other once all the others are dead. They might go into war with each other, but they kind of feel that they are in the same fight. They're the same community. They're the same. They're citizens to the same cause, which is against the conspiracies of the government or the left, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, what I'm hearing here is that that global citizenship is a moving target, you could say, and it's led to polarization, it's led to layers, it's led to shifting allegiances, and so on. It's very easy, of
Yeah.
course, to be overwhelmed by all of this. And so I'm looking at the time. I'm aware that we've got to close in the next few minutes. So what I'd like to do is to say, okay, so given all of this, and a lot of it sounds really bad news. I mean, what keeps you ticking, for instance? What keeps you optimistic or hopeful? Yeah, because I mean, I confessed before we started the interview that I was an optimist, and I think you said the same. So, given that we can actually list all the woes that we're facing as a planet, all the woes we're facing politically and sociologically and economically, but there's still something going on, I think,
Yeah.
that we can be distracted from, because we can look at the woes. It's very easy to look at all the bad news. So, Jacques, you're sitting in Brazil. Brazil's going through, quite its own struggles at the moment. Australia is going through quite dissimilar struggles in some respects, but still they involve multinationals. There's a whole bunch of bellicose warmongering type folk here at the moment saying we've got to start thinking about, war in the Pacific again, and a whole range of other things that wouldn't have been spoken about even a couple of years ago. So where are you sitting in terms of optimism, Jacques, before we finish?
So I was telling you that I discovered that I was an optimist when I wrote that story for that anthology, the Shine one, and the process of discovery involved the writing itself, because it's very hard to tell an optimistic story. It's very easy to be doom and gloom, to write a doom and gloom story. It's also very easy to write a Pollyanna story, a very naive story, but an optimistic one, which is a story about a path for for the better, but in which there are struggles, there are hardships, there are things that must be overcome in order to get a better state. That is very hard. And in the process of writing that story, I kind of analyzed my whole story. Again, being part of the extreme left anarchist, very optimistic, very interested in making things better. I thought, well, I've been in this because I truly believe that we can make a better world. I've been involved in the hardcore punk scene also because, well, this community, makes things better. We engage with communities. We do things. I've been involved in science fiction because I really like to think about new states and better futures, and also criticize and analyze what are the bad things about today. So so in that process, I found out that being optimistic, for me, it was part of my identity. And I realized that, well, if I were not an optimistic, I would be a really douchebag, right? I would not be interested, I would be like into, I'll do everything wrong. I would just go, live for profit. I would live, not for the betterment of other people in other communities. So I would really be a bad person willingly if I were not optimistic. So being optimistic is also about not being that douchebag. But responding to answer your question, there are many good things happening in Brazil right now. We have a very troublesome, to say the least, government, but we have many people that are getting together, doing very interesting stuff. In our terms, in terms of foresight, there are many signals of change out there. Very interesting things happening. I've wrote some forecasts in the past couple of years that this next decade, or the decade that we're living, is the decade of turmoil and experimentation. And that experimentation part is very, very important. And they're experimenting not, most great experiments are, especially social experiments and political experiments and economic experiments, they're not trying to, enrich a company that's already filthy rich. They're trying to make things better. If you have if you look closely, you'll find reasons, not just reasons, but really examples of things that are replicable, things that you can do to improve your community, or your even your life, your country, your community. Yeah.
Really good. I mean, that's a great place to end, because one of the key themes of this course is that social cultural ferment is the backbone of collective learning, that increased complexity leading to increased paradox, again, forces us back into a reflective state, and that the whole thing is evolutionarily sort of oriented, not that we are moving from A to B in a linear sort of evolutionary sense, but all that ferment, all that experimenting that you're talking about is in itself the negative as well, because there's a lot of experimenting going on in trying to reimagine fascisms that will work and all the rest. So we can't sort of brush that aside, and there's a lot of violence involved in all of this as well. Violence against other humans, but also against the planet itself. So as always, life is interesting, but if we look to the processes, I guess it's where I take heart, and that's what I'm hearing behind what you're saying. You're giving specific examples, but ultimately, it's there is a future out there that's we could be proud of. We could be proud of. And I think it's important.
Yeah, you think of Sohail Nayatallah's Futures Triangle.
Yeah,
it's not just about the things that are happening today, the push of the present. There's also the pull of the future.
Yeah,
right. There are images of the future, imaginary things that we wish for, we want, goals that are really important as well. So establishing that is in having that awareness that we can aim at better, and then look at examples of things that are happening today to kind of leverage that or accelerate that. It's also very important. Yeah,
that's great. And I guess that's where solar punk comes in and that sort of thing too. But we need to stop here simply because I'm aware that the students have to watch a certain number of other things. So I'm going to stop the recording, Jacques, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.